I'm Dr. Valerie Mahomes, and it is my pleasure to host this interview with Dr. James P. Comer. We are grateful to the Foundation for Child Development for hosting this series. Dr. Comer is a Maurice Falk Professor of Child Psychiatry at the Yale University School of Medicine's Child Studies Center in New Haven, Connecticut. He is known nationally and internationally for his creation of the Comer School Development Program in 1968. This teamwork concept promotes the collaboration of parents, educators, and community to improve student development that in turn helps them achieve greater academic and overall school success. Dr. Comer's pioneering work in school restructuring has been featured in numerous newspaper, magazine, and television reports, and has been published in many academic journals. He is a co-founder and past president of the Black Psychiatrists of America. He has been a consultant to the Children's Television Workshop and has devoted his efforts to numerous local and national organizations serving children. He is the author of 10 books, including Maggie's American Dream and Leave No Child Behind. And he's the recipient of many honors and awards, including 49 honorary degrees. In 2014, President Barack Obama appointed Dr. Comer to the President's Commission on Educational Excellence for African Americans. It is my pleasure to introduce to you Dr. James P. Comer. Welcome and greetings.
Well, thank you. Pleased to be here.
So let's begin with this wonderful resume of your work and all of the things that you've accomplished throughout your career. Who or what influenced your work?
It was my family, my mother and father in particular, but all of my siblings also contributed as we grew up and as models and role models for me. That was important. What contributed was the fact that we had a joyful, fun-loving, curious, caring family environment. And we had a ball. At the same time, we were expected and encouraged to achieve and to be successful in our goals, to have goals. So it was that combination that really made it possible. But then a couple things happened in particular that as we were succeeding, I had friends who looked like me, who were just as smart and just as able as anybody in our racially integrated school. And yet many of them, despite their abilities, went on a downhill course. Yeah. And that question was why? What was the difference? I couldn't see it. And eventually, as I trained, I began to see the kind of experiences that children need, that I had, that they didn't receive, even though their parents were good people who wanted them to succeed. It was that desire and intentional effort on the part of my parents to focus on our development. They understood development intuitively. Yeah. And it was the focus on development that really made the difference. Both the caring, the love, the excitement in the family, the things that we did, that was a big part of it. But then it was also the guidance and the sanctions and the things they did not want to happen. All of that got conveyed to us in indirect but very powerful kinds of ways. And I've come to believe that that's the critical difference between success and difficulty for children. And it's that when the parents can provide that kind of support, and if not the parents, the neighborhood, the schools, the communities, whatever kinds of activities they're in, but it's everybody together has to provide
Absolutely.
experiences that help children grow, develop, and be able to express themselves and solve problems in a way that works for them and the people around them.
And that's so important. And we often don't underscore the importance of the ways in which our parenting behaviors, the family culture that we
Yeah.
establish impacts children and their development. So how did those ideas operationalize, if you will, into shaping and implementing what we're now calling the Comer School Development Program? I'm sure you probably didn't start out to call it the Comer School Development
No.
Program, but all of those ideas are so foundational. Your family experiences are so foundational to what we now implement and embrace in our schools. How did you come to put all of these together in the model?
Well, there were a couple experiences that I had before I even got into the schools that influenced the model. And that was at the end of my internship, I visited a home as a doctor. And there was a very disturbing situation for the mother, depressed, and children. And the question, how did that happen? Because I knew that lady, I knew that family. So the question was there. When I went on to the service, I found, and I did volunteer work at a place called Hospitality House in Washington, D.C., which was for people who had been thrown off the welfare rolls. And there I saw many children like that family and under difficult circumstances who, again, were smart, able kids and people. And they were going to go on a downhill course just like my friends. So the question was, where can we make a difference? And at that point, I wasn't committed to psychiatry or education. I was going to be a general practitioner of medicine. But then the more I got into it, I began to ask, where could I make a difference? And I realized psychiatry and eventually public health were the places where I could go to try to put a hand on this problem and try and be helpful to the kids and their families in some way. And so schools, it seemed to me, was the place, because the school after the family is right along the developmental pathway and line of the developing child. And it's good development that leads to good school performance and can lead to good school performance. And it is preparation for life that really makes a difference for kids. Not just taking tests, not test scores, not that. That's part of it, but it's not the key even. The most important part of it is the personal development, that commitment that the child who is developing well makes finally to being a productive, responsible citizen, and then on into having the strengths, the skills necessary to be successful in school and in life. And that's a process. It's a course that has to be developed, and the individual has, and then there has to be people around the individual who helps him or her develop in that way. And so I began to understand that. Then I went into schools, and all of a sudden, the program collapsed. It really exploded, and we were almost thrown out. I
Oh
had to
no.
work. I had to work with the parents, and they got to know me. They came to trust me. They understood how much my life was like their lives, like the lives of their children, and we could work this out together, and we could make it work. And that's what we did. We began to figure out how do we do this together. I believed it was together because I knew that my parents were the ones. I didn't I didn't figure it all out. They figured it out. so so I was very open to the involvement and the engagement of parents. At the same time, I brought the kind of knowledge of development to that situation that was not there before. Uh, and, the, but I also discovered that many of the educators, although they were caring, hard-working people, had little to no child development training. And as a result of that, did the best they could.
Yeah.
And yet weren't getting the kinds of results we wanted because the structure of the schools didn't permit it. And the preparation of the teachers before they got there and all the other people in schools, it was not what was required to create a culture in school. So you can have a culture at home that supports development, but if it doesn't follow into the school, you then have a problem.
You have a problem.
And so we had to create a culture in school that worked to support the development of children, which means that all of the participants in the school had to understand something about children and had to understand how all of the pieces of the school program have to work and work with each other. The pieces have to interact well. And the overall system has to be a culture that works for the adults and all the participants and works to support development of kids.
Absolutely. And it seems to me that you use the word pieces, and it seems to me that what the model has done is to bring them together and to create this holistic environment to create that culture. Can you share a little bit about what the SDP model is?
Yeah.
What are the components and how does it create this culture for shared decision-making and for parent involvement and all the kinds of things that your parents and your family gave you the opportunity to experience during your childhood? How do you recreate that in the school?
Carefully. When it exploded, when the program exploded, because we were under pressure. It was the 1960s and Martin Luther King had just been assassinated and everybody wanted everything to happen right away. And it didn't, we weren't ready and it exploded. Then we had to figure out, how do you put it back together again in a way that addressed all the things I've just said were important? And the most important thing was to have a governance and management team made up of all of the participants in the school, representative of all the participants, so that the team didn't have everybody. It had people selected or themselves or voted or however we selected to serve on the team. And we had parents, we had the educators, the professional child development people. And so everybody in the school, all the stakeholders were represented on the school planning and management team. And eventually, as we moved along, we created a 9-element process model in which all of the participants had a stake in and helped to change the way the school worked and created a culture that then worked for the children and worked for all the adults around the children. And that 9-element structure wasn't off the top of our heads. We had, as incidents occurred, we figured out that we create this school planning and management team. But then once there's a question of how do you carry out the academic program? And so that school planning and management team created the comprehensive school plan that was both academic and social. And so we took all of the activities that schools more or less sometimes, and sometimes they do it because they want to please the children. Sometimes they do it because they want to punish the children. The whole variety of reasons that we do things in schools. We developed a social calendar throughout, and we designed the social calendar so that it created exciting activities throughout the year for the children and for the adults. And we planned and organized what we were doing within that social calendar and within the academic program, and integrated those wherever possible. And staff development so that they could develop the skills necessary to carry out their task. And we had assessment and modification of them as we went along to see whether it was working or not, make adjustment. The school planning and management team was in charge of making that happen. They had the responsibility for that. The principal usually led the team, but that was an option. But that was the basic, I'd say the core of the 9 elements, those two. But getting people to work together,
yes,
to trust each other, to like each other, if that was
that's the hardest work.
That's right. So to create that kind of environment, you had to have some guidelines for interactions. And we had 3 major guidelines. No fault problem solving. We didn't spend all our time blaming somebody and trying to find who was responsible for this or that. We focused on solving that problem. Then there was consensus decision making. When we talked together about how to solve things, we had to come to a consensus, not vote, because if you vote, somebody wins and somebody loses. And the person who loses says, well, you won, you do it. Now, we wanted a consensus. And the question was, can you live with this approach? And if you could, then we'd go along they would go along even though they didn't like it. But what usually happened was that it either worked and they liked it, or they discovered another way as they were working and found that was better than any of the ways discussed. And so it was in that give and take way, with an open and with a commitment to trying to find a solution rather than to try to paralyze and try to punish people. And so it was that consensus. And then to work collaboratively together, not paralyze each other or the system. Those ideas then permeated everything that the teams in the school did. And eventually they automatically began to think no fault, consensus, and collaboration. And as they worked and carried out that comprehensive school plan, they felt success, and they helped design the program, and therefore it belonged to them. And when they succeeded, it was their success, and it was everybody's success. If they didn't succeed, then they had to fix it. And they had to find another way to do it, so that it was the ownership and the sense that I can do this, we can do this, we can make this happen. One of the funny stories was the years later when I received an award and they did a video, they came back and they were taking a picture of the video and he brought the parent members of the team back and they were having a great ball and thinking about what had happened. And the videographer said, well, what did Dr. Comer do? And they looked at each other, they couldn't remember. That was a compliment. Is it? I didn't do it. I suggested that this might be a way, and this was a structure in which they could use to figure out how to manage, but I didn't do it. They did. And so they were empowered through this process to do things that they didn't think they could do and had successes that they hadn't been experiencing before. And that made the difference. And that creates, even now, people who are a part of it have these fond memories of the times they did it.
Yes. And that seems to be the enduring hallmark of the program, that ownership and that empowerment to not only address the issues that are brought to bear from their policymakers and so forth, their school districts, but the local community issues that affect the local community. So how do the schools and how does this program now give people the wherewithal to address issues of equity and sociocultural issues, diversity issues, all the kinds of things that are going on today that might have an impact on this kind of trust and cohesion that you talk about that's an important culture in the schools?
Yeah, well, the school planning and management team still has to deal with whatever comes down the pipe. And it doesn't come piecemeal the way I see a lot of issues come from somewhere, somebody brings it in. Most of the time the school focuses on what they're trying to accomplish for all their children, and trying to work out with it. Now, the hot button issues can be handled, but they have to be discussed in the same manner that you talk about every other issue. And you try to find, you reason. And when it is very difficult in meetings, you have subcommittees and you work out, but in the end, you're focused on what's good for the program, what's good for the culture of the school, what works for the children right here in our midst. And that's why we don't run after solving problems all over the world. And we're right there in the school building. Difficult to do.
Yes.
But after you create a culture that says that's what we do, then it is easier to do.
So in the context of that culture, then what do you expect from teachers and parents and educators, all who are involved in the school, to ensure that kids are performing to their potential and have access to education?
Yeah. First of all, the idea is the same about teachers and everybody else that we have about the children. Nobody is here because they're bad, or they don't want to work hard, or they don't want to accomplish and succeed, or they want to hurt Johnny or Mary. We're not there for that reason. Now, there may be things going on with us and things going on with others that create behaviors that get played out in the school. But we have to discuss that and work out solutions to that, or people have to hold it. It's right time, right place behavior is what we need in schools, and that's what you have to call for and try to promote. That may not be an issue that can be handled in the school. It may not be, it may be something that the principal has to take to, or whoever the leadership group is, has to take downtown or into the political arena, wherever, but it can't be solved here. And whatever you can solve, that's what you want to focus on. And
yes. Yeah, and that's so important, kind of looking at what's within your realm of control and how do you use this process to manage that. And I would imagine that that would be really reassuring and affirming for new teachers coming into schools, having this model in place. I don't think it's well known among the viewing audience how much work you've done in teacher preparation and teacher
yeah,
education.
yeah.
So tell us a little bit about that, your teacher education work, and how you were able to kind of connect the school with teacher education and teacher preparation.
Yeah, from the very beginning, we realized that it's not the teacher alone that has to, that the parents have to know what it is you're trying to do and how can they work to support you in school and at home, and how you have to be a team in order to make that happen. Now, we had from the very beginning the school planning and management team, which is one of the three teams, but it is the kind of engine for the whole process, and it worked closely with parent team, which is the second team, and the mental health team or the school staff support team. Those three teams worked together in a way so that they helped each other figure out how to address problems, appropriate time, place,
Mm-hmm.
and could refer to outside and other places so that problems go to the right place.
Mm-hmm.
And not everybody's trying to solve the same problem at the same time. It all gets worked out through the work of the school planning and management team. And we realized from the beginning that in order to work in that way, the administrators had to understand child development
Mm-hmm.
and how to run and manage, organize their schools, run and manage in a way that created the climate and the culture that allowed them to take on difficult issues, allowed them to understand that the child who is acting out is not just being bad, and that that it's developmental often,
That's right.
and that you have to understand how to deal with it. Now, that led to uh, training for educators, and it led to training for parents. It led to parents wanting training so that they can work with their children differently. And parents who came to understand that you could talk rather than spank and scold and control. And all of those things grew out of facing real problems in the school. And we tried not to formalize training as much as possible, but have the training grow out of natural activities so that some of the most effective training and learning came not from a lecture about,
Mm-hmm.
but came from a child who had been a problem was meeting with the school staff support team with the teacher, and the teacher was getting something for her classroom. But then other teachers began to hear about it and began to drop in. And eventually all the teachers would drop in because it was so helpful. And so my point is that we didn't try in the beginning to make people learn about child development. We tried to put it in ways where it was effective, so that they wanted to learn more about child development. Now, we did have orientations where you talked about it and so on, that when they came in brand new and so on. But the idea was that wherever you could, and in the normal work of the school, help people think about how children grow and develop and work and think. That's what, and I always said, it's embedding child development in the fabric of the work. Yeah, and that's what we try to do.
And
so
clearly
much,
that is sustainable. That's what's sustainable, because it's in the fabric of the work. So you're not constantly creating and recreating solutions to problems. You have an apparatus already in place.
Right. And it becomes the culture, because that's the way we do things here. And remarkable things happen sometimes. I remember the child, what did she say? It was a question of tone, and she figured out when she said something that had been recorded, and they showed it. Yeah, the words are right, but the tone is wrong. The child figured that out. So it's in the practice, in the work, that you help children, you help the parents, and you help all of the adults, educators. Now, it's important for adult educators, for all of us actually, to know that some of the problems, some of the times, come from us.
Yes.
Yeah, because we're human beings.
Yes.
And we don't always do what we'd like to do. And we don't always behave the way we'd like to behave.
We don't always get it right.
That's right. And how you manage that is what helps you grow up. And how you manage it as adults is very important, because you model it back to the younger people, children around you.
I remember you telling a story about students who were kind of misbehaving in the classroom, and one student stood up and said, "We don't do things like that here."
Yeah, right.
And so that is really, talk about being integrated into the fabric of the school. So your work is not only relevant to the teachers and the parents and the administrators, but the students aren't passive beneficiaries of this. They're active participants in this as well. Is that correct?
That's correct. And we were talking to a reporter who came once, and he listened to that and he couldn't believe it. And he said, "What? Give me an example of that." And a little boy raised his hand and he said, "I have a younger brother who fights all the time." And he said, I said to him, you don't have to fight like that. Use your voice."
Oh.
See, and he had gotten that use your voice from his life in the school. And he was then taking that into his home and into his community. And that's the way it works.
And that is so important. So this model has been implemented in schools and in educational contexts, but its import has broad implications outside the school. And as
Yes,
people have these experiences in school, they take it to their home, they take it to their communities, and they use these principles to
uh,
address
yeah,
compelling issues in their homes, communities, society.
that's right.
So that, talk about implementation and dissemination, that is really profound, I think.
Yeah, the spouses of some of our educators have told me that you changed our home. You changed our home. that
That's right.
we work differently because of what we brought from the program.
And I remember when we were doing trying to do the evaluations of the programs and trying to randomly assign schools to the Comer context or to no Comer context.
Right.
And there was so much confounding, for example, because people wanted aspects of the model, or they had learned about it and they had brought it with them to a quote unquote non-SDP school.
Yeah.
So these ideas are transformative. And if they're in the fabric of the school, they also are in the fabric of our worldview and perspective. And you
Right.
can't separate that out, wouldn't you think?
Absolutely. And that is a problem with evaluation and research, that trying to evaluate when you have that kind of meshing of the of the ideas and ways of thinking and changing of the ideas and ways, because people come together who have been exposed and expose others.
That's right. That's right. So how do we take these ideas then to address some of the most compelling policy issues that are pressing today? And what are some of those issues where you think these ideas might be brought to bear on these pressing contemporary issues and policy issues that we're experiencing today?
Well, some of what we need to do, first of all, we need to focus on training and preparation of everybody who is working with children and helping them gain the capacities they need to be able to do that well. Uh, you know, I think when we started bringing groups to New Haven or the Child Study Center to talk about the program, and they were preparing to use the principles of the program, I started asking people how many had had a child development course. And for 10 years, there was nobody. Yeah. And then finally, home ec and a couple French kinds of things. And now, gradually, more and more. But for the most part, simple child development, most educators, through no fault of their own, had not had. And there they were on the front lines of supporting child development, or should be supporting child development. They were out there with no training.
Yeah.
And it was intuitive training or preparation that allowed them. Now, that is possible. My parents were intuitively child rearers, good child rearers. You know? Sometimes I didn't like what they were, but they were child rearers and were conscious of it, and of what their task was. They had to figure out what worked and what didn't work. Well, everybody who works, whether it's the custodian or the principal, everybody in a setting really ought to have some sense of how children grow and what supports they need to be able to grow.
And child development is that the active ingredient in teacher education, higher education programs that would also kind of spark that transformative nature that new teachers bring to schools, that having those tools that they can then bring to a school and build on what's the culture in the schools that are using this model would be wonderful if we can get that to happen universally.
Yeah. It's going to require that not only parents and not only schools understand that development and learning are inextricably linked, and that schools have to be, the people who work in schools have to be supported. But you also have to have some adequate pay for teachers and administrators. And it's particularly bad and troublesome in the early childhood programs. Uh, we've got to pay for that important task. Rearing children is nothing more important than rearing children well, successfully in a society, and particularly a society that wants to be a democracy. You've got to have children, rear your children well so that they can protect themselves from politics, self-interest politics, and they can and handle their own environment and grow in ways that they don't contribute to the problem, but they can become responsible citizens. And that takes more than the school. And so connections between education and other social structures is very important. And discussions in which we begin to understand how all of the structures in a society have to work together well. And that one of the places where you start learning how to do that is in the school.
Absolutely. So this has been a wonderful conversation. And as we bring this part of the conversation to a close, what are some takeaway issues? What do you want the audience to know about you, your work, the program?
Well, I guess I haven't changed. You know, when I was a little boy on the playground, the lady upstairs behind had a little child, 2 years old, 3 years old, and she'd send him out on the playground. And my mother asked her, well, why would you send that little child? And the lady says, I just look out to see if Jimmy is out there. Because when Jimmy's there, he takes care of the little kids. And so I've always cared about the little kids. But the older I get, I realize that it's caring about the little kids that prepares them to do well during that period where they're gaining the capacities necessary to succeed in adult life. And those who gain those capacities are the ones who can protect the democracy and protect the country. That's what we have to do. It's more clear than ever before that you can't have a scientific, technology-driven society and not rear people in ways that they can't function in it. And when you don't help people develop well, you begin to have problems.
Yes.
And you wait until they have problems, and then you want to fix them quick, cheap. No, you can't. You have to start from the beginning, and you have to focus on development, and you have to help kids gain and take responsibility and commit themselves to becoming successful, responsible citizens. And that's a major part of how we prevent future problems or adult problems. We want to step in and after they're teenagers and later on. And it just takes too much energy, too much time, and it's just too difficult. And we're in trouble because of that. And to fix it, we've got to focus on develop early and all the way through to the point that they're then prepared to function in the larger society.
Well said, Dr. Comer, well said. And I think that's a message that has enduring power and efficacy. And I hope that people leave this session taking that to heart and figuring out ways in which they might be able to start from the beginning and looking at child development and applying that knowledge and those principles to every aspect of their work and their lives. So thank you for this time. And thank you again to the Foundation for sponsoring this series. And we look forward to continued conversations on this very important topic.
Thank you very much.